Okay, and welcome to the second week of our online experience. And today we're going to be introducing the topic of video editing. And my hope is that we'll be able to give you enough background that with the tools that you have, you should be able to assemble your television commercial. And so I'm not expecting miracles out of you, but we are going to try to make this work. Okay, so as you see, today we're talking about video editing. And I wanted to talk about the editing basics and what it is that you're going to need to know to get started. And again, I know that this is not going to be easy for you, and certainly some of you have more experience than others. But the first hurdle that we have to go through has to do with the footage. And that is going to be a critical element of this because depending on what you're shooting with, now I'm going to assume that you're shooting with one of these. All right, so I'm going to go back to face here. Okay, so I'm going to assume you're shooting with one of these, right? A cell phone. And basically, this is what you got to work with. So you're going around like this. And so now remember, this, not this. Please, this, horizontal, because your television screen is horizontal, as you can see. All right, so your footage is in here. Now, how do you get it out of it? Now, cell phones have gone through a transformation. It used to be that there was a little bitty SD card that you could get at. Now, that's still true. But in order for me to get at the SD card in this phone, for example, I would have to remove the case, which would take me about 5 minutes, and I'd be lucky if I didn't break it. Then I would have to pry the back of the phone open, and then I'd have to find the micro SD card, and then I'd have to put it inside one of those adapters, because most of your laptop computers, the SD card on the side is a full-sized one. So that's really not a practical solution. I'm not saying it isn't possible, but it's not practical. So unless your phone has the ability for you to remove the SD card in some way that's useful to you, you're probably going to want to access it using a USB cord. Now this is an example of a USB cord, and obviously this is the end that you would plug into your standard USB slot. Now this smaller end goes into the phone. Chances are you use this to charge your phone anyway. So what you would do is you would take your USB cord, plug it in here, plug the other end into the computer, and then go through the menu screen to find out where your actual footage is. And that's going to vary depending on your system and a lot of other things. Usually there's a file called videos or something like that. It could be that you've got billions of photographs and little movies that you've shot that you've got to sort through, so you may have to go to the little file manager and look for date, and so choose the ones with the current date, and then you're going to want to move them into your computer. So that's easier said than done. So I'm going to put a special thread up just to talk about that, and hopefully that will help. The other possibility, which I may have forgotten to mention, is that some phones and some laptop computers have a Bluetooth connection where you can literally get access to your phone wirelessly through your laptop. Now, depending on how new or old your laptop is, you may have the ability to do that. The phone also is involved, depending on what kind of technology you're using. I'm willing to bet that most of you could do that, but that's not to say that that's the easiest solution. Just do whatever makes the most sense for you. So that'll get the footage out of the phone into your computer, hopefully. And another thing to mention, most of your phone footage is going to be pretty standard, but every phone has a different codec that they use. Now, what is a codec? I think it's probably worth talking about that. Your cell phone basically does not have a whole lot of storage in it. I mean, a lot or a little is relative. But whatever your cell phone has, it wants to preserve. And so there's only so much you can store on the phone. So for that reason, the phone is designed to compress the information. Now that means that it removes anything that it doesn't have to have and tries to come up with a scheme that allows it to recreate as close as possible to what it originally saw with less information. So meaning that it isn't going to go pixel by pixel and record that information perfectly, which theoretically it could, but you would have a huge storage file. So what it will do instead is come up with a scheme to say, okay, from here to here, that's all green, let's say. Let's say we're talking about this here. if I were taking a picture of this pixel to this pixel, if I'm looking at that row, all going to be the same color. So therefore, I don't have to go every little bitty dot and say what color it is. And so there are different ways that the systems can do that. And so those are called codecs. And so ideally, Adobe Premiere should interpret all of these files. Now, one of the nice things about this Creative Cloud, which I can't say I like everything about it, but one of the nice things about basically no longer buying your video editing software is that you might as well have the most recent version. And so every few days, whenever Adobe decides to update the programs, you may not even be aware that they're updating. But then suddenly your system can recognize other files. So I don't think that's going to be a hard thing to overcome in terms of getting your footage properly downloaded. So Adobe Premiere. Once again, at this point in the course, you simply have to have it. Because that's really the industry standard editing software. There's others, but really this is the one that most of the industry is using. And also it's available to you for free. We don't have the ability to give you Final Cut. That's a Macintosh only program. I don't necessarily recommend or not recommend it, but what I will say is that I can guarantee you access to Adobe Premiere, whether you have a Macintosh or an IBM-based system. And so for that reason, it is absolutely essential that you get it and use it. And what you're going to want to do is create a new project. Now at this point, we're going to go into show and tell. Okay, so here we are at the Adobe opening screen. And so Adobe gives you this screen here, which you can see. And this will tell you everything that you've opened recently. It may be blank, there may be nothing there. But if I look here, and by the way, there are some tutorial files here that you might want to look at if you want to. I have some tutorials up on the tutorial page, and we'll talk about that later on. But if you go to a new project, this is basically what you want to start with. This stuff over here. If you go to New Project, you just click on that. Then you will get this dialog box. And one of the reasons why I glance over here from time to time is I want to make sure that I'm allowing you to see this stuff. Okay, so this is your dialog box that governs a new project. I'm going to take you through this because I don't expect you to know this going into it. One thing I will say about the Adobe programs is that it's kind of like walking into the cockpit of a 747 and you see dials and gauges everywhere. If you were a pilot, you may know what all of those do. But if you've never flown a plane before, you'd say, what the hell is all that? And the same thing goes with these things. Now, on the other hand, I don't want to put you in a situation where you only have one button to push and it's very limited. So, let's try to do a happy medium. So I'm going to take you through these a piece at a time. So the first thing on the new project window is the title. So I'm going to call this commercial_demo. So this is where we're going to do the demo. And then, very important, one of the most important things you do at this point is hit this little button here called Browse. And that is going to take you into this dialog box. And this will show you your file manager. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the folder where the footage that I prepared is stored. And there it is. And so the folder is called TV Demo. I know what drive it's in. I know it's in this PC. And this is basically it. Now, you're not going to see anything there. You're not going to see your files because it's only looking for folders. So I'm going to hit Select Folder, and that's it. Then if you look over here, you will see TV Demo. That's the name of the drive and where the folder is. Now, the rest of this stuff is largely irrelevant because whatever it says, there's not much you can do about it. For example, the Mercury Playback Engine GPU, you may not have that. Your system may be limited to software only. If that's the case, that's the case. It will still work. It just may not. It may be a little sluggish from time to time. So I'm just going to hit OK. And then the moment I do that, I will get some kind of a screen configuration. And so right now there's basically nothing in it, so it's hard to tell what it does, but these are the basic windows which we will go over. And so one of the first things I'm going to ask you to do is go to your area up here called Window and look at Workspaces. You will see there are a bunch of workspaces. Chances are the one marked Editing should be good enough. That should have your basic configuration. You can customize it if you want to, but hopefully it won't be that hard. So I'm going to show you the windows that you absolutely need to have available to you, and you can decide how you want to arrange those on the screen. We're not really going to get into that so much because my hope is they'll be there under that basic configuration. Okay, so since there's nothing in this project now, we're going to have to put something there just so you can see it. So what I'm going to do, I've already saved the file. So if I go to import, that's going to import the footage. And from there, I first have to go to where I put the footage, which in this case will not be here. Instead, it will be here. So this is where the files that I've chosen to work with lie. Now, this is the project file which governs them. So remember, this project file is not useful in itself. All this does is control everything else. And so basically, I'm just going to say, well, first of all, I'm going to grab a piece of footage. Now, one of the things that I have here is some drone footage. So I'm going to just open that real quick. And so I'm just going to hit open. And remember, that's under import. Now notice that we've got an import dialog box here. It's importing the file. And so that file is now here. Now this is the first window to recognize, project, the project window. Now let's say you can't find the project window, which you should be able to. So if you go down here, you should find it under projects, and this is the project that we're working on, commercial demo, and that is open. If there's a check mark on it, that means it's open somewhere. And so this is your project window. Now, there's only one thing in the project window, and that's that footage that I put in there. I'm going to click on that footage and drag it over here into the timeline, which should be there. Now, once it's in the timeline, you can see it appears as a stripe going across the screen. That is the footage. And so then up here, you have something called Effects Controls, and if you can't find that, you can go under Window and look for it. It's not open. But if I click on the file down here, on that clip, you'll see I get some options for working on that. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But the other important file, or important window is this, the program window. This is where you can actually see what's going on. So just to make sure, I'm going to take my face out of here, and so we can just have a talk about this. Now, I also use the scopes. Don't worry about the scopes in this class. It's not that important. But notice on the program window, I have controls. So if I hit play, you will see that the timeline playhead begins to move across that file. And you should see the file doing something. Now, that's a drone footage. And so what I want, this commercial is going to be about Methodist University. And so it doesn't have to be very elaborate. Now, in this particular case, I don't have an exact script for this, but we're going to pretend that you do, which I'm sure that you do. And whatever you've shot, you should be able to put together. Now, one of the reasons why I chose to use this clip is that almost all of it is completely unusable. Because there's really only a couple of areas here that I'm interested in. So notice this little long thing down here. This will allow me to expand or contract the clip, and I can drag this across here. So I happen to know that there's one particularly nice shot here going in on the tower. So basically that's where this thing starts. And so from this point here, I just want to look at a piece of that. And if I just, since I know I don't want anything before this, I'm just going to eliminate the rest of that stuff. Now there's two ways I can do that. One, I can go way over here, click and drag, and move the endpoint closer, and eventually right up to this playhead. Or I can hit the letter C on the keyboard, and that will turn the cursor into a razor blade. Then if I go right where that line is and click, it will create a mark. Then if I hit the V button, like V for Vendetta, then I'm back to an arrow again. So I can click on this or this. I'm just going to delete this, hit the delete button, and that's gone. And so if I wanted to, I could move this all the way back to the beginning of the timeline, and start again. So let's say I'm going to do that. And I hit play, and you can see I've got pretty reliable footage from that point inwards. And at this point, I can use that as much as I want. Let's say I want this a little more intimate. I can maybe start later. But you know what? I'm pretty sure that that was the place I wanted it to be. So we'll just do the flyover as kind of like an intro. And we'll only take a few minutes of this. Now remember, we also have 30 seconds to do this. So we can have as much or as little of that as we want, but we're constrained by time. So I am pretty sure that is the very most that I could ever use there. So once again, I hit the C button to get the razor blade. Now I'm down here. I tap there, hit the V button to get rid of the razor blade, and just get rid of all the rest of that. Now notice, my timeline begins at 0. Currently, it goes all the way the heck to 6 minutes, practically. So that's obviously no good. So I'm going to drag this back to the 30-second mark, and I am going to expand the timeline by dragging this little thing here so that I can position this so that 30 seconds is pretty much what I've got to work with. So let's say that's 30 seconds, and that's my little piece. And so I know I'm not going to use all of that, but that will be good enough. Now, one thing I'd like to cover is, let's say you wanted to do a really quick transition, like a fade in. If you look up in the effects area, this window here, we're going to grab video transitions, not effects, but transitions. This is a very useful thing to know. These are very quick. There's only one of them that's any good, and that's dissolve. You don't want most of these things. They're very annoying. But under dissolve, just choose cross dissolve. That's the best one. Click on it and drag it to the head of that video. And it will do that little thing where it glows. Let it go. Now you can see that little bitty thing there. And if I hit play, now you see it fades in. Good enough. Okay, so, and let's say in the interest of time, that's good enough for now. So the other thing I wanted to do is to demonstrate that you can bring in music. And so we're going to do that. Now the music itself isn't all that important, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a file import. And I happen to have some music, whatever this is. I brought that music in for this purpose. And if I drag that into the timeline, you'll notice it doesn't go to the same place that the video does. This is an audio file, and it's handled separately. Now I'm going to bring it down a little bit because some video comes with audio. So I want to make sure that I'm making life easy for myself. So there is my audio. And you can see it has what's called a waveform there. And I can even pull down on that window a bit to get a better look at it. Now let's see what this would do. So if I hit play here, then we have that music, and that will keep on playing no matter what goes on with the video. So you see now we finished the shot, and it keeps going. Now that music, I'm going to play a little bit of it. Look over at the levels. That is really way to the top. So we don't want the music to be that loud. So there's ways that we can fix that. I'm going to show you a quick, easy way to do it. Because yeah, you could fade it out. You could go up here and use the volume. But I find it just as easy to click down here. Since we know the whole thing is loud, I'm going to go to audio gain. You right click down there, not left click, right click. Go to audio gain. And I am going to I'm going to set the gain to -10. -10. And so that's going to bring the level noticeably down. So now if we play this from the beginning, go ahead and click, that's not quite so intimidating. And so that means that we can bring in, perhaps something else. And so the other thing I wanted to demonstrate, all I want to do is I want to bring in a piece of something else. And so right now we're going to leave the audio ragged, but I'm going to go outside the scope of where I plan to work, and I'm going to bring in something that I want to take something from. So if I'm going to import something, and I have an old piece of video that has some interviews on it. And the only reason I'm using that is because, first of all, sometimes you're given that, But the other thing is, I don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel in this particular case. So if I take this this older promotional video that we used to have up on our website, I'm just bringing that in, and I'm going to drag that into here, and I won't bother listing all of that. I'm just going to scrub through it real quick, because most of this is not used anymore. So let's say that we find some interviews there, and I could use any one of these things. So this is one of our former students, and so let's say if I were to start here.
When I first came here, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. But once I got into the communications department and noticed what was going on, the equipment they were using, and learning, what it took to get a communications degree, I got very interested. I did animation, I did video production, and learned media law and the like.
Okay, so let's say that particular section is probably too long, but it's at least an example. So I'm going to hit the C button. I'm going to put a cut there. In this particular case, I'm not going to use anything else from it, because all I just wanted to use for it is an example. And let's say that I try to go back to the first part of what he said. And so I'll even take it from the because I know that I can get rid of anything else I don't need. So if we play any of this.
When I first came here, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
So
once I got into the communications department and noticed what was going on, the equipment they were using, and learning, what it took to get a communications degree.
Okay, so let's say we want that much of it, and we'll pretend for a minute that we're gonna marry his interview to something else. So if I go back for a minute here to the full picture, I'm just going to drag this over, and let's say for this particular case, I'm just going to drag it right back towards where the opening footage is, and then I'm going to stretch it back to that 30-second mark so that we can be mindful that we've only got 30 seconds to work with. And so that would take us, so a little bit more, and sometimes this can be a little bit annoying. So pretty much we're talking right about there. So we know we're not going to be able to use much of this, but we can use it. And so let's say we have that there. Remember, you can also bring in voiceovers. So what I want to do is I want to have this start with this footage. I can move this up. And so let's say I want him to come in underneath it somehow. Let's see what that does.
When I first came here,
so you can hear him,
know what I wanted to do.
but you can't see him.
Once I got into the communications department and noticed what was going on.
Now we could have it fade out. So let's just say,
I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
So let's just take it at that. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And let's say that we'll assume that we'll come back to him when he says something more relevant. And let's say that at least for a moment, what if we wanted to transition to him for a minute? What we could do is we could create a window in this. So let's say that I hit the C button again, and I tap there, and really that's all I got to do. I hit the V button, and let's say I just open some of this. Let's say I create a little window, so it does something like this.
When I first came here, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
So let's say I even give him a little bit more space so he can finish what he's saying here. And I'll stretch that out a little bit. And let's say that I want to do a cross dissolve. Just drag one there. And if I'm going to do that, I got to make sure that the footage is under that. Or I can make the dissolve shorter. Let's do that in this case. And let's see what that does.
When I first came here, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay, very good. And then we can add something else. And that's part of how we would make this happen. And so there we have we have two footage elements. And let's add one other thing to the mix in order to make this work. Let's go ahead and add a graphic. So if I go to File, Import, I'm just going to grab a university logo. So now this one's an easy one. Let me explain what I mean by that. There it is over here. If I drag this onto the timeline, doesn't matter where I put it right now, you can see there's one problem with it. It's very small, but it does work. This logo was literally created for exactly this purpose. And so right now it's against the black background and there's no other substance to it except the logo itself. If I were to instead put it over here, you can see that it cuts a window for itself. It's an overlay. Now it's small, which gets us back to this other thing here. If I click on this and I go to Effects Controls, which are right here. And so what I want to do is I want to make that a bit larger. Effects Controls is an important window to have. And literally it has something here called Scale. So if I click on the little down triangle there and I bring Scale up, you can see I can make that logo a little bit larger. I can also dissolve it in. So let's see what this would do.
When I first came here, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
Now, one of the things you're seeing here is lag, because we're beginning to ask the computer to do a few things it doesn't normally want to do. Sometimes you can do this just by cranking it back and starting it again. See, now the footage is playing a little better.
I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
And you see, you can do that. Now, you could even take it a little step further and have the logo move. You can apply animations, and if you hit the stopwatch, you can make it animate. And I'm not going to go into that here. That'll be for a later lesson, perhaps, but this will get you started. And that's what you're doing. And all you got to do is keep building from here to that 30-second mark. And that could be what you do. So let's try one other thing. So I'm going to go ahead and import. And this, I'll take a different version of the logo to show you that there are other versions. And this one, if I bring it in here, this one is different than the other one because this one is not transparent. So if I put this over here, you'll see, well, actually, it's not really designed the way, because this is specifically for that. We would have to utilize this differently. But let's say that we wanted to make this our closing shot. Now you can see it's not going to fit because it's got these black borders on the edge of it, because this was modified for the Physician Assistant program. I have no problem with that, but what we do want to do is we want to unmodify it for our use. And so once again, I'm just going to go to Scale and I'm going to scale it up, this time not as much, and then I'm going to position it downward and maybe scale it up a little bit more so it loses that border. And let's see if I can get away with it. Almost. And so in that particular case, we may have a little bit of a problem. So what I could do is I could take it into Photoshop, and that's what we'll do for our next step here. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and here we can see the actual picture. Now this was taken off the internet. You know, it's not perfect. But if we actually wanted to use this, we can still salvage it. So we don't want the white areas up here. We basically just want the logo itself. And so the first thing I'm going to do, and again, we don't want Physician Assistant Program because we're just using this for the university as a whole. So if I were to grab this marquee tool, this allows you to cut out what you don't want. And so in this case, marquee, make sure that's still selected. I'm going to basically do this. And so I've got that much of it. But I know that there may be a problem going into this having to do with space. Because remember, when we lose that white space, it gets a little dicey. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do a trick. I know I need more space on the edges, so I'm going to make a bigger file. So if I go to under Image, if I go to Image Size, that'll tell me how big the file is. Now, first of all, the size is great. Nothing wrong here. So you can see this is 1275 pixels by 1650. Now, it isn't a standard size, but we know that's how big it is. So we don't really need that much more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the width just a little bit. So the way I'm going to do that, and I don't want to do it by extending this because that will stretch the logo. I want to keep this intact. So I'm going to do a File New. And so I'm going to make a new file. And instead of, now there's pixels. Believe it or not, that would be fine. I'm just going to take the standard size, 1920 by 1080. It's actually bigger than I need it to be. And so there's a white space. And I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to select all. Select all. And I'm going to say Edit Copy. Then from that image, I'm going to go to the new image and just say Edit Paste. And so there's my logo. I can move it around anywhere I want. And so I'm going to say that this is probably where I want it. What I want to do is I want to make the rest of this white area green. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go over here to my little eyedropper tool. And I'm just going to grab this green because I'm pretty sure that green is consistent. This isn't a gradient. That's just green. So then if I go over here, to this tool. This is the gradient tool, but it also has the paint bucket tool. If I were to then click on the background layer, so remember, we've worked with layers before. It's important to understand this. If I go on here, I'm going to go to my background layer because the background is the white part. And I'm going to dump that in there. So notice we've solved most of our problem because this whole background area is now green. But we got this little piece left over. Now there are a few ways of doing this. I'm just going to do the most easy and obvious one. I'm going to go up to layer 1 and I'm just going to paint bucket that as well. Now that took care of most of it. There's still a little bit here. So the way to do that from here, and so there's other ways I could paint that out, but it may be easier to do it a different way. So I'm going to undo the last thing. So I'm going to undo the paint bucket, stay on this layer, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase the parts of this layer that don't match the background. So if I just go over here to my eraser tool, I'm just going to erase that. And I could even make it a harder eraser. So if I go to... I take the hardness up, so that will just basically blow away anything that it doesn't like. And so there's my eraser. And so then we're almost ready to go. Then the only other thing I need to do is just crop out the part that I want. So let's say that I frame it like this. So that's what I want. I could even move the frame a little bit more over so that I'm centering it, because there's a little bit of extra space on that end. And then if I go to Image and Crop, there we have a better image. And so let's say that that's what we want to do. So I'm going to save this, save as, and I'm going to put it in TV demo. In this case, I'm just going to save it as a JPEG. I could save it as a bitmap as well, and I'm just going to call this logo underscore end. So if I do that, and I can, in this case, I'm just going to keep the compression on there, even though I don't really need it. Then if I go back to the Premiere window, I'm going to just go ahead and get rid of this, because I don't really like it. And then I'm going to import the new one. Import, and that would be logo end. And there it is, logo end. And that should do it. Now, for some reason, it looks like it's a little bit off. It could be that the actual video format's slightly different, but there again, that is easily fixed. If I scale it up so that I no longer see the black background, that should do it. And I could even apply a cross dissolve like that. And let's see what that would do.
When I first came here, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
So you can see you can apply that later in the video if you wanted to add other content. But really, this is as complicated as it gets. You could also do it more simply if you're so inclined. It doesn't have to be that complicated. I'm just showing you examples of things that are a little bit more complicated, meaning that if all you really have is a series of shots, you just sort of set them next to each other and it works. And so in this case, we're doing it more like a collage where one fades into the other. If it's a simple product shot with a spokesperson, you just have the spokesperson talking, and maybe you can even cut in the product shot, which is even easier than some of the stuff that we're doing. So let's say, well, first of all, let's say we're going to cut this off at the 30-second mark. And so right around there is good enough. And so I'm going to go here to the audio. I'm just going to go ahead and cut that off. So I hit the C button, and then boom, it's cut. Hit the V button, boom, it's gone. And so now there's nothing beyond this point. And for the audio, I'm going to fade that out. And so the easiest way to do that is go back to the effects window, and instead of video transitions, I'm going to go to audio transitions. And I'm going to go to crossfade, and I'm just going to take constant power, so it's going to fade out nice and quickly. And so that's what it will do. So if you listen, play that, and you can hear it fade out. There's a little bit of a pause there. Okay, and so all of this, you can apply anything that you want. And so let's, I know it's been, we've covered a lot, but the one other thing you might want to do is your own titles. And so let's say I create a title screen here. So let's say I go to File, New, and I'm going to grab Legacy Title, because that's the easiest one that I know to use. And it will create this title dialog box. And I'm just going to call this overlay underscore graphic. So that will give me this window here. And right now it's not over anything because we're seeing a blank screen. So let's say that all I'm going to do is I'm going to probably make this a little bigger so it's easy to see. I'm going to go ahead and hit my text tool. And so let's say I just draw a nice box, and I'm going to look at my text requirements. And right now they look okay for now. I could choose my font ahead of time, but let's say I just want to type the word opportunity. Let's say that that's what I'm interested in, and we're just going to leave it that simple. So if you want to change the font, you can go here, highlight your words, and go and look at the different fonts available. Those are all of them. I'm just going to leave the font as it is. And you can also highlight the word, make it bigger, go up here, just drag this, make it a little more there. You could center it, and I guess I could grab my little arrow and move it around a bit. So let's say for this particular class, that is more than sufficient. So it's one word, and then at that point, you don't even have to do anything. You've already given it a name, so if I hit the X here, it disappears, but it shows up. It shows up here, overlay graphic. And so if I grab overlay graphic and I put it out here, there it is. Now if I were to put it up here, it would be over that. And so that is what you can do. You can also have it appear anywhere. From a black background, you could even put something else there. You can put another background of some kind. But let's say that this is done for now. to get it out of the system, to create a final version of it, you would do a file export media, and that takes you to this dialog box. And again, I'm going to take myself out of the picture here. And for here, the important thing to know is that you want to leave it on H.264 and leave it at match source. That way, whatever your timeline is, that's what it's going to be. And I'm just going to give it an output name. And so here we are in the area that we're working with, and I'm just going to call this version 1. And notice it's an MP4, and I'm going to hit save. Then, if I hit the Q button, the program should open up the encoder, which is here. And this is a separate program, but in your case, it's not going to take very long for it to do what it's got to do, because we're only talking about 30 seconds. So let it do its thing. It opens up, and then the only thing you got to do with all of this information, most likely, is just hit this little button up here with a little play, start Q edit, enter, whatever it is. And there it goes. It's going to blow through this. You can see there is the stuff. And that's it. Then when the little check mark is done, we know that the project is done. So if I call up the file where it is, and there's my version 1 that I just exported, let's see what I get. If I double click on this,
when I first came here, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
and obviously we've got some blank spots in here. And so there it is. Now, if we wanted to, there's one other thing we could do, is we could grab this, the drone footage, since we know we have so much of it, and we could take it all the way to the end, so you can see that it does its thing. And so in this particular case, all the things that are missing are not all that important. And so that is how you want to approach this. So there it is. This is a relatively simple demonstration of the Adobe software, and my hope is that this will answer more questions than it raises. But I would also suggest that you go to my YouTube channel and look at some of the tutorials that I already have for Adobe Premiere, and I will highlight those in future announcements. So have a good week.